Hello there. Welcome back to the First Stage Woodworking Podcast. My name is Paul Hyatt and I'll be your host. We talk about craftsmanship and finding meaning in our lives. I hope that you enjoy this podcast and that you will like, subscribe, and share it along with other people who might be interested in stuff like this. Thank you and God bless. Welcome back to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. I hope that you've been able to take a listen to some of my previous podcasts. And the last podcast, I said if you have a chance to go and listen to the podcast that I did with my friend Josh Johnson, because that was quite the podcast. It was definitely an exciting one to take a look at. And then last week I discussed my thoughts on the character Faramir from The Lord of the Rings and talked a little bit about one of the key things that I've drawn a lot of inspiration in life from. In a lot of my more creative endeavors have been from J.R.R. Tolkien. So kind of key to be able to understand a little about me and first stage woodworking and stuff like that is to know that I draw a lot of that inspiration from Tolkien. But the last point that I made in that podcast after talking about Faramir, which was really a discussion of the positive masculine, of like what makes a good man a good man. I talked about how like when we choose to do something to the best of our ability, when we orient ourselves properly, when we are courageous, when we are acting in accordance with the good, and I also alluded to this in another podcast that I did about the good craftsman being the reflection of the good man, is that imparts on us a great amount of goodness. And one of the marks of that, one of the things that jumps out to us, and is kind of a self-evident truth, I think that people are able to see that the good person loves to the fullest and is willing to give themselves up through their love for the highest possible good. And in my life, I have had the pleasure of living a life of servitude in many ways. So I joined the Marine Corps in service to my country, and then I was a public school teacher in service to a community as a public school teacher. And it was a pleasure and a joy to be able to do those things. But that has put me in contact, especially with being in the military, of seeing that element of self-sacrifice. That highest form of love, which is why I'm calling this episode No Greater Love Hath a Man Than This, which is to lay down one's life for their friends. And I thought that was very fitting to discuss just briefly for Memorial Day. So I'm not going to make this out to be a very long podcast or anything along those lines. I just wanted to kind of briefly reflect out of gratitude and respect and love and admiration for those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice, and really kind of how we're I don't know if we're getting away from the respect of that and the admiration of that in our society, but it certainly seems to be that way. It certainly seems to me that that there is a bit of a disconnect in our society between those who essentially serve and love, and those who, essentially, I guess, don't really understand any longer that all of this is held up by that, by that element of self-sacrifice, and have come to take it for granted, I guess, is kind of what I have looked at. Now, there's been a lot of research that's been, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but there's a lot of talk, at least, about that particular idea of like where it is we are going wrong there. And as we have gotten further and further away from wars having the necessity of the draft, it has made it to where in people's families, it is very unlikely now for people to actually have someone in their family that is that actually saw combat. So it's not very likely for people to have people in their family, like in their immediate family, that actually served, and then even to a much lesser degree, it's very, very unlikely to come across people who have actually served in combat. It's a lot of people don't realize this, that it's only about 1% of the population that actually like actively serves in the military. I think are the numbers on it, and then of that 1%, it's only about 10 to 20% of those people that actually serve in combat. So, this idea of just being in the military and that being a guarantee that that you're going to go and see war during a time of war is just simply not the case. And I'm not saying that we should necessarily be, like drafting people into service and going off and fighting war all the time. All I'm saying is that if you don't have that element of self-sacrifice instilled in you at an early age, and realizing that that all of this came at a price, at the price of a lot of people's lives, well, then it kind of flows from that you're going to more than likely take that for granted, and that's a very, very unfortunate thing that I think is taking place. And in my own life, I've even had people that have just been openly hostile to men that are like me, that have gone and experienced war and things along those lines, whether it be out of jealousy, pride, arrogance, or just hatred for people that wore the uniform, because they cannot separate the individual wearing the uniform from maybe the fallen world of politicians and political figures that we live in. But in any case, I do think, though, that like hopefully the thing that we can bring back in our society, and the thing that I would like to talk about today, that it's like regardless of what you feel about the current U.S. situation with regard to how we are engaging war around the world, I just hope that you'll know that the men that embody that put on that uniform and go and fight, they are doing it for, in their mind, a higher purpose, and in many ways it is for a higher purpose, and that the brotherhood that is experienced on the battlefield is like no other experience that you're going to have in this world, and it is because that whole relationship is one based on brotherhood, of looking out for the Marine or the soldier to the right and the left of you. And so that's why, in particular, if you want to have a more in-depth talk about that, then I would listen to the podcast that I did with my friend Josh Johnson, because we talk about that relationship that we kind of forged on the battlefield, even though we come from completely different backgrounds, and from completely different walks of life, but just immediately saw something good in the other, that was willing to we were both willing to sacrifice in order to be able to keep each other safe, and that forges in you. I do think that it's kind of sad that it's like some people in this life will never experience a person that would actually lay their life down for them, and that to me is kind of a shame when I know that there are you know literally thousands of men that I served with that would definitely lay their life down for me. I have no doubt of that. And I commonly joke around with my wife that it's like, it is kind of wild that in probably every single state I have at least one friend that if I were in a time of need, they would do anything in order to be able to help me, literally give me the shirt off their back, and I would try to do the same for them, which is kind of neat. But being that we are, I'm recording this briefly on the Sunday before Memorial Day of 2023. I did just want to talk about, I think every year I'm going to talk about this, that, I guess just from the educational aspect of it, Memorial Day has become a holiday where we tend to memorialize those friends and family members of us that have passed away. But that's actually not the intention of the holiday. That isn't the intention at all. The intention is to honor those service members who died while defending this great nation. And so because of that, because I served and because I served with men who died, who laid their lives down for this country, I feel that it is my obligation to talk about them and to memorialize them and talk about those experiences, so that people can know the depth of those people, so that they never truly die. And that, I think that I actually maybe talked about that when I talked about this last year, that we essentially die two deaths. I heard a priest once say, there's the death of your physical body, and then there's the second death that you have when people stop talking about you. So to a degree, like men like my grandfather and the men that and my grandmother and so many of my family members and these men that I served with, they truly do die when we no longer say their name and talk about them and memorialize them. So the Marines that I personally knew, there were several other Marines that died when I was overseas, but I don't want to speak of Marines that I didn't personally know, because I didn't personally know them. But these Marines I can vouch for and say that they were great men, and it was a pleasure to have been with them, and I greatly appreciate the sacrifice that they made. So those were Michael Bailey, Bob Newton, and Ralph Fabry. And those three Marines, just very briefly, Michael Bailey, he came to us. He was actually in the Navy for 10 years before he joined the Marine Corps because he wanted to be closer to the war effort. So, already right there, very heroic thing to do. That is like, he already has 10 years in. More than likely, he could have continued. I think he was working on a nuclear submarine or something like that while he was in the Navy, but was of a much higher rank. But joined the Marine Corps, went through Marine Corps boot camp, and came to us as a Lance Corporal. So quite the demotion in rank. But acted as our armorer, and then later went to Lima Company, and was killed in action in the summer of 2010. And he was a great guy. I got to know him pretty well while I was in service for the short amount of time that we were with one another. Um, and then Bob Newton was the one that I probably knew the best, though we were in different platoons the entire time in the Marine Corps. He was actually like I remember seeing him when I was in boot camp. I was in Echo Company. I can't even remember how all that works now. Echo Company Platoon 2106 was my company, or it was my platoon. I think that he was in 2105. Um, and he was just a good dude. He's from Illinois. Really, really funny guy. Everybody liked him. Everybody got along with him really, really well. Liked to do like off-roading on ATVs and stuff like that. Um, Nickname was Baby Legs. He had a particular amount of charm to him that just kind of made everybody really, really like him. Um, and he was also killed in action in the summer of 2010. And then Ralph Fabry was a combat cameraman that came to us. He was an attachment. Came to us and just kind of immediately won over our respect because he was there to document essentially what it was like to fight in Afghanistan in the summer of 2010, and and so to take photographs and kind of report on what he was seeing and stuff like that, and he would be. And he really kind of wanted the whole experience of being an infantryman, which was kind of cool to see because he really won us over because he would help out on working parties. He wanted to be up in the machine gun turret and stuff like that. And he was just a great young man, a really great young man, who we all loved quite a bit. And he would die toward the end of the deployment, and it was very hard for a lot of us to take. At least my thought process on it was that it was like, we all were infantrymen. So we kind of, there's that heightened sense of your own mortality, I think. But as a combat cameraman, it's like as an attachment, I think that many of us felt that it was our responsibility to make sure that he came home safe. And it wasn't a failure necessarily on anyone's part. It was just one of those things that takes place in combat. He was one of the ones that got unlucky, and I don't know how else to say it than that. But I was able to go and visit. There's a little memorial for him in Pennsylvania, there, in a little memorial park and stuff like that, which is kind of cool. That it's like after these people pass away, we do memorialize them by naming things after them and stuff like that, so that they never, hopefully, truly die, because they made great sacrifice. And as an individual that saw that more closely, the gratitude that I have to those men and to their families is second to none. And I try to live my life in such a way. I think that that's really what they would have wanted, especially seeing the way in which Newton lived his life and whatnot. I don't think that he would necessarily want us to be sad and shedding a bunch of tears for him all the time. He would want us to live our lives and live our lives well. And that's exactly what I've attempted to do with my life, is that it's like, when you get done with something like that, you do realize how close you came to dying. And it does make you appreciate the gift of life more fully and want you to live it to the fullest. And I think that in many ways that helps to memorialize those men, and hopefully they smile on us from heaven when we do that, because of their sacrifice. So, you know, that highest form of love is essentially what I wanted to reflect on for this week. But only briefly, because it's one of those things that, and I hope that the audience would understand that it's not necessarily an easy thing to always reflect upon. But I suppose the thing that I can offer to all of you is that it's like, this life that we all live, this world that we live in, it came at a cost. It comes at a price. Um, and there have been many before us that have laid down their lives in sacrifice so that we can have this weekend of spending time with our families and enjoying the beauty of our world and having cookouts and hopefully taking at least a brief moment to pray for those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice so that we can have that. Thank you all for tuning in and listening. I hope that wasn't too heavy of a podcast for you, and I really, really do hope that you enjoy your Memorial Day. So thank you, and God bless. Thank you for tuning into this podcast. I hope that you'll like, subscribe, and share this information along with people who may be interested in it. God bless.